We here at HaLev attempted to get a broad range of perspectives for people to present over the next several weeks, which we were not totally successful at. We got a couple of great presenters, but we did attempt to get even broader range. I wanted to say that I think the Reconstructionist movement is not neutral on this development in the context of the Israeli government. And I wanted to just give a little bit of provide a little bit of background. So this is from the Reconstructing Judaism website in the Israel section. It's written there that Reconstructionist Judaism has long viewed Israel as an essential element of Jewish peoplehood. Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, the founder of Reconstructionism, supported a Zionism grounded in three core values: Jewish survival, Jewish cultural and religious renaissance, and Jewish ethical nationhood. He promoted a vision in which two vibrant centers of Jewish life, Israel and North America, would support, shape, and when needed, give feedback and critique to each other. Our love for Israel exists alongside our desire to seek a just and lasting peace for Israelis and Palestinians. The central organizations of our movement have long advocated for a peace agreement that will protect Israel's security and the Israeli military occupation, fulfill the legitimate national aspirations of the Jewish and Palestinian peoples, and guarantee the human and civil rights of all involved. So that's kind of a general backdrop. Now, I'd want to just a couple of briefer comments from our movement in the aftermath of the current government being, or the elements of the current government being elected back in November. This is an excerpt from a statement from the World Union of Progressive Judaism that our movement endorsed. It says, the state of Israel and the world's Jewish diaspora communities have a relationship built on a common history and shared values. The reality of a ruling coalition in Israel that will include dozens of Knesset members who freely express racist, homophobic, and anti-democratic beliefs is frightening and is an anathema to progressive Judaism. It has potential catastrophic consequences for both Israel's democratic character and Israel diaspora relations. And lastly, this short statement from Rabbi Deborah Waxman, the president and CEO of Reconstructing Judaism in the aftermath of the election. She wrote, the prospect of Israel's next government raising up the far-right racist Jewish power party of Itamar Ben-Gvir is frankly horrifying. I respect the Israeli electoral process and as an individual and Jewish communal leader, feel compelled to voice profound worry about what we're witnessing taking place. So I felt it was important to kind of frame our conversation within the context of those statements from our movement. And now I'm going to turn things over to Alan to introduce our presenter for this evening.
Okay. Our presenter for the evening is Professor Peter Haas. Professor Haas is also a graduate of Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. His ordination as a Reform rabbi in 1974. After serving in the military for 3 years, he enrolled in the graduate religious program at Brown University and received a PhD in Jewish Studies in 1980. He joined the faculty at Vanderbilt University in 1980, where he taught courses in Judaism, Jewish ethics, the Holocaust, Western religion, and the Middle East conflict. Dr. Haas then moved to Case Western Reserve in 2000, where he was appointed chair of the Department of Religious Studies in 2003. He stepped down as chair of the department in the summer of 2015, fully retired in the summer of 2016, but has been keeping busy with various activities, volunteer activities. I'm just going to list that among them is the adult education courses that he teaches for CWRU Siegel Lifelong Learning Program and the Institute of Learning. in retirement of Baldwin Wallace University. So with that, I will turn it over to Professor Haas. And thank you for being able to present for us. We appreciate it.
All right, well, thank you for the invitation. I keep joking to people, this is what's happening in Israel. It's kind of a boon for me because I'm getting all sorts of speaking engagements. But anyway, I'm delighted to be with you. I haven't seen Alan for a while, and so it's kind of good to be back in that kind of circle. So my thinking is I would talk for 10, maybe 15 minutes, lay some kind of background about the complexities of the current Israeli governmental situation. And then if we can just go for questions, and I don't know their answers, but we can certainly go for questions. But it's quite a mess right now. As a matter of fact, there was breaking news this morning again. So, but I'll try to at least give you sort of the background. So let me see if I can share screen here. So I think you all are aware of the basic structure of the Israeli government. The legislative body is the Knesset. The Knesset has 120 mandates, they call them. And that's what really rules the country. Any leader who can put together 61 votes or more is then authorized to form a government. He can go to the president, in this case, President Herzog, and form a government, name the ministers, and start governing. If he loses his mandates, if there's a vote of no confidence, then things kind of go back to zero, and there may have to be another government or another election. In the history of Israel, there have been a plethora of parties. This was partly addressed in the last several years in the 2000s by demanding that a party has to have at least 4 mandates before it can join the Knesset. So that has cut out a lot of 1 or 2 people parties. In this election, these are the 12 parties that ran and received 4 or more seats. You notice Labor as at the very bottom. They squeaked by. Religious Zionist is a joint party. They joined together during the election. So it's Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. It's really 2 parties, but they ran under the Religious Zionist flag. The other double party here is Hadash Ta'al, the communists, and an Arab party with Ayman Odeh. So that's why I got 12, even though there are only 10 things listed here. Anyway, if you look over the extreme right column, you'll see how many seats the different parties actually got. Likud is the biggest party, but only halfway to 61. And you can see where various parties cashed in. What happened in the end is Netanyahu, I'm going to say he pulled a Kevin McCarthy. He promised and promised and promised, and he got these 4 parties, or 5, because Religious Zionists and Tzma Yehudit, which means, by the way, Jewish power. These are the 5 or 4 parties that are actually in the government. And he got them in the government by promising them everything. So in the end, Likud has 34 mandates, United Torah Judaism, which is Ashkenazi black hat, right? Their interest is money for yeshivas. It's pretty much as far as it goes. Shas is Ari Deri, that's Mizrahi religious, but Deri's had quite a bit of government experience. So he demanded a lot. He also got a lot. And then you had the Religious Zionist Otzma Yehudit, that's Smotrich, who wants Israel to be a Jewish state, and he doesn't mean that merely Jewish ethnically, but Jewish sort of Torah-ly. So he's not sure about reform or conservative or reconstructionist or the American Jewish community altogether. He wants a Jewish state in both the ethnic and the religious sense. And as some of you may know about Ben Gvir, he had a habit of showing up at unrest in Jerusalem when there were land disputes or house disputes with pistols and kind of yelling that we really got to shoot Arabs. He later sort of modified and said, well, I meant in the kneecaps, but he still, that's his thing. And I think he's probably in many ways trying to provoke the Palestinian or the Israeli Arab community. It's like, come on, try me, because he really wants to crack down. And he's already made an incursion on the Temple Mount. We could talk about that. Well, an incursion or a visit, however you want to, categorize it. So he's kind of a loose cannon. So that's the new coalition government of these basically 5 parties: Likud, United Torah, Shas, and Religious Zionist. What I want to show you next is the actual structure of the government. So put on your seatbelts. I don't know if the screen shows everything. No, there's more. So I may be able to collapse this or not. Maybe not. But as you can see, there are a lot of ministries. Okay. I don't know if anybody is counting, but I counted 38, might be 37. One of the people who really made demands was this guy, Aryeh Deri, Minister of Interior and Minister of Health. He is also Deputy Prime Minister. So, and he got a lot of other people in his party. If you look, like Minister of Welfare, because the Shas constituency lives off welfare, so he wants kind of control of that. Ministry for National Security, that's Itamar Ben Gvir. And the police were broken off and given to him as well. So who else is in here that's kind of interesting? I mean, we can talk about some of these specific people, but there's a lot of very right-wing people who've gotten all sorts of interesting ministerial posts. This is the largest government, 38 ministries in history. A lot of these are made up because Netanyahu had to give everybody something. So if you look within the last 3, minister within the prime minister's office, minister within the education ministry, and minister within the welfare ministry. What does that even mean? Right? He's what I want to say, invented ministries in departments so he can say, well, I can't make you part of the welfare. I can't make you minister of welfare, but I can make you a minister within the welfare ministry. So Shas got a hold of that one. Got a hold also of education ministry. So it's an extremely large government. It includes people who really can't stand each other. It was a matter, again, there's a Kevin McCarthy kind of thing going on. People ask and demand it, and Netanyahu needed his 61 mandates, and he gave away everything. So this is the current government. So Shas voters got a pretty good deal, 11 mandates, but boy, do they get a lot of ministries. Okay, one other thing I was going to point out here. There was So, I mean, is this all clear? So when he has a cabinet meeting, he's got people here who can't stand each other. And it's also not clear, and again, you could kind of look through this, where the authority of one person stops and the next one begins. So there's a lot of infighting. And I can give you one example that already happened, which was a group of youths went out to the West Bank. This was Tuesday or Wednesday, as I recall, and set up a new settlement. Benny Gantz, who is defense, or is he up here somewhere, said, no, we can't do that. This is illegal. We have to tear it down. Smotrich, who is national defense or something, said, no, it stays. Benny Gantz tore it down. He sent in his police, and they dismantled the settlement. So that's a fight between two ministers in the coalition government. So you can see how things are going to go. I think Netanyahu has his hands full. The other thing that happened this week is that Aryeh Deri has been in the Knesset since like the 1980s. He founded the Shas Party. He's the leader of the Shas Party. In many cases, he is the Shas Party. So if he goes, the Shas Party goes. I mean, it's his thing. He's 11 mandates. He's had several ministries over the years. In 1999, he was convicted of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust, and was given a 3-year jail sentence and banned from the Knesset for 7 years. Okay. In December of 21, so 2 years ago, he was convicted of tax offenses. He resigned from the Knesset. He received a year suspended sentence and had to pay a large fine, 180,000 shekels. Because he resigned, there was never a final court determination that he was what is called in Israel he was responsible for moral turpitude. So he says that determination never was made. I've got my 2.5 ministries, the 2 ministry prime minister. I'm staying. Whatever. I'm staying. If Benjamin Netanyahu wants to fire me, that's up to him, but I'm not going. So what happened this morning is he got fired. So we'll see what happens next. So Netanyahu said, okay, you can still remain deputy prime minister. And we'll see if that flies. Now, the other, I should say, twist in this is there is no constitution in Israel. So on what basis does the Supreme Court say the law that allows Aryeh Deri to have a cabinet post, there was a law passed, it's called the Deri Law, it just passed. How can it overturn a law of the Knesset? And the argument of the Supreme Court is reasonableness. I'm not kidding, it's reasonableness. So what's reasonable for you may not be reasonable for me, but the Supreme Court can't declare something unconstitutional because there's no constitution. So they said this is unreasonable. Anyway, with all the infighting and back and forth, Aryeh Deri was kicked out of the government this morning, although I think he's still deputy prime minister. So we have that. We have the destruction of the new settlement and that fight between Ben Gvir and Benny Gantz. So there's a lot of turmoil going on. So I think that gives you kind of a general background of what's going on and how people are trying to slog their way through this. So maybe this is a good point to stop and see if there are questions. Or is everybody just totally stunned? Yeah.
Yeah, Peter, what we were going to do is I was going to give you some questions, and then we would open it up to everybody after that. So thank you for that initial presentation. I think I'll start with the proposal that's been put forth. I know it's very complicated in terms of what the Supreme Court bases their decisions on if they don't have a constitution to rule on. But there is that proposal that they change the law so that the Knesset can overrule any decision of the Supreme Court by a majority vote. What I've seen is that I've seen articles saying, since Israel doesn't have a constitution, and since the government is put together by the prime minister, then that would concentrate all power in one area, and it would make the democracy kind of tenuous. And I just was interested in what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a significant worry. As of now, the Supreme Court justices were chosen or at least proposed by a committee that includes current contemporary chief justices, 2 representatives from the Supreme Court, 2 members from the, I think, Justice Ministry. You know, there's a group of about 9 on this committee, and they, you know, propose who's going to be the justices when somebody retires. So the argument of the right wing, let's say Netanyahu or Smotrich or whatever, or Ben Gvir, is that this is a self-selecting group, that they're proposing people who are on the liberal side of the spectrum. And whenever there's a right-wing law, they just say, oh, that's not reasonable, and they overrule it. So the argument is we have to have a whole new way of appointing these people so that it's not a self-selected group of liberal justices. Yeah, and so the Knesset, 61 votes to overrule anything the Supreme Court does, means all power is in the Knesset. They choose the prime minister, they okay the ministries, if this law passes through, they would be able to override the Supreme Court. And they say that's perfectly okay because we are the Knesset, we're the ones who are elected here. The Supreme Court guys aren't elected, the prime minister isn't elected, but the Knesset members are elected, and we represent the voice of the people. And so they don't see any problem, having everything in their hands.
What are your thoughts about, I mean, to me, when I hear that, I think of minorities, because the majority doesn't necessarily have the interests of minorities. And so, for example, I know that one of the ministers declared himself a proud homophobe, and he is in a position to, you know, they were in a position to put laws forth which allow for discrimination, for example.
Right.
So what does that say about the, or, you know, you talk about minorities, what about the Palestinian minority?
Right.
Now, how are they protected then?
Well, in some sense, if it could turn out that they're not, right? That this will be a right-wing Knesset with a right-wing government, with right-wing ministers, with a right-wing Supreme Court, and that's the end of that. So Israelis themselves recognize the problem here, which is why there are these huge demonstrations in Tel Aviv. But everybody agrees there has to be reform in the Supreme Court, and there's a lot of feeling that there needs to be a constitution. But right now, if this goes through, all power of the 3 branches will be in the hands of right-wingers. And some of them are pretty right-wing. So yeah, it's scary. And I mean, it'll be kind of interesting how the American Jewish community is going to relate to all this. If there's a crackdown on LBGT, on Arabs, on Palestinians, on Reform Jews, on conservative Jews, so on and so forth. How is the American Jewish community going to relate to all that? So, you know, it's kind of ironic. I wonder if a lot of Israelis, you know, are reversing what we used to say, right? Well, at least there's always America we can go to, you know. But yeah, it could be very scary, and I'm not sure how to put this. I think Netanyahu himself is not that radical, and that he thinks he can control this. I am not so
I
sure.
have to go. I'll be right back.
I think he's got himself. Again, he's in the same corner as Kevin McCarthy is. He gave away everything, and I don't know how he's going to maneuver his way through this, but we'll see. So on that comforting note,
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I had a knock on the door.
Oh.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about that aspect that you were talking about, but I had one question, which is the American response. And I don't know if you could answer this question, but how is it that the right wing, I mean, you think about Israel, you know, we always thought of it as kind of like a socialist labor dominated country and you know, kibbutzim and how is it that Israel became such a right-wing country?
yeah, no, it's a good question, and I think there are a couple of reasons I can point to. I don't know exactly why this happened, but I mean, first of all, you have very strong sort of religious and Zionist groups all together, so you have the parties already there that can make up this coalition. The second is, I remember I was in Israel in the late 90s, and this was when Oslo looks like it was going to pop, and there's going to be, you know, all this agreement. And the people I ran around with, you know, the academics, were all saying, yeah, you know, this is really good. We can finally get together with the Palestinians. You know, there's light at the end of this tunnel. I was back for a conference 4 or 5 years later in 2004, may have been 3, and Oslo had fallen apart. We were in the middle of the second Intifada. There was this Durban anti-racist conference, and all of these people were, you just can't deal with the Arabs. There's no way we're going to have peace with them. We just have to move on. We can't make a deal with them. It's impossible. So I think there was a cognitive shift in a lot of the left wing. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And third, I wouldn't discount the Russian immigration. The Russians, I talked to a lot of them, and their basic story was, we just came from the socialist paradise. We've had enough of that. And so a lot of them are really right-wing, didn't like labor, didn't like merits, didn't like any of that. They were Thatcherites, right? We want private enterprise, we want the government. So between those three, I think the left dropped off the map, right? Merits didn't even get 4 seats in this election, and labor squeaked. It really squeaked by with 4. And there's really no strong leftist party anymore. So I think between the second Intifada and the Russians, you know, it's just like, it's impossible to deal with these people. And Ben Gvir I really picked up on this. He basically says, look, the Palestinians, I think he says the Arabs, I don't remember, but he says they lost. And they've never realized it. And they keep thinking if they push a little bit further, you know, a little bit further, somehow we'll yield. And we keep giving concessions, and so they push a little bit more, push a little more. And he says, that's not going to happen under me. We're going to crush them. As soon as they start a problem, I'm going to go in. I'm going to break bones. I'm going to bash heads. We're going to let them know they lost. And I think that resonates a lot with Israelis who've had enough of, bus bombings and, people being run over and shootings and, all this kind of stuff. So he talks a very tough talk of we're gonna stop this. It's enough. So I would say those are the kind of things that are going on. And I should say the Israeli economy, which is sort of Thatcherite, free market economy, is booming. So, who wants socialism? That's my answer.
Yeah. Okay, well then let's go. Well, I had one question before I get back to the United States response. I read about a proposal to change the law of return, the qualifications. Can you elaborate on what that proposal was and how likely is it to pass?
I don't think it's likely to pass, but given this government, weird things are going to happen. So right now, if you have a Jewish grandmother somewhere back in Podolia, right, you can return under the law of return, right? I don't know if any of you saw that short documentary, Nicholas and the Law of Return. No, it's a very cute documentary. It's about 90 minutes long. This guy comes over from Romania. This is in the early 2000s, and he wants to be a guest worker, and he's sitting around a table in downtown Romania, and people are saying, don't go to Egypt, it's horrible, and don't go to here, and Turkey is a mess. And somebody says, Israel is really good, go there. So he goes to Israel, and he's working on a building in Tel Aviv, and somebody says to him, if you're Jewish, you get an apartment and you get this and you get that. So when his time is up, he goes back to Romania, and his wife says, oh, I think my grandmother was Jewish. So they run off to this little village in the backwoods of Romania, and they're going through the school records, and sure enough, on one of the grading sheets, it says she's Mosaic, right? So they get the local wedding photographer. They don't have copy machines. And he brings that with him, and he comes back with his wife, who could care less. And he's welcomed at the gate, and he's taken to a special room, and he's given an apartment, and and at the end, he has a car, and he has a business, and he's doing really, really well. And it ends with the filmmaker saying, and I know this story is true because he's working for me now. But that's the law of return. So this woman was maybe Jewish. The grandmother, whose mother was Jewish, she was Orthodox, going to her house and their candles and icons and all that. Anyway, so the law of return is if you've got a Jewish grandparent, you can qualify for law of return. Smotrich in particular is saying, half these people are coming under this law, like the Russians. They aren't Jewish. What are we doing? We're diluting our people. This is crazy. He wants to change the law to you have to have, I think your mother has to be Jewish. And if you can't prove that, you can come and get naturalized maybe, but you don't come under the law of return. And that's what he's pushing, because he says we're just diluting the Jewish peoplehood. So that's what's going on here. And for the American Jewish community, boy, that's going to, so to speak, disenfranchise a lot of American Jews.
Yeah,
could imagine.
It's a profound potential change then.
I think it can have all sorts of complications and ramifications. And my sense is the American Jewish leadership is just afraid to get involved in this thing.
Okay, still going to hold off on American responses. I had there was a question about the Supreme Court that someone raised. What do they base their decisions on if there's no constitution to guide them?
I'm not joking here. Reasonableness.
That's it, huh?
That's it. Reasonableness. We don't like the law, so we're overruling it. Next. It's really like that. I think Barb Truitt had a hand up at one point. Maybe not.
Okay, well, let me, one more thing I'll get to, and then we'll open it up. A friend of mine who's active in Americans for Peace Now sent me an email about protests that they're organizing in Washington.
Uh-huh.
And so I think the line goes from the American political system, everything from the Biden administration to the Congress. They get their marching orders around Israel. What we're allowed to officially protest or actually take action on from the sentiment of the people. And so I was wondering two things. What is well, one question would be, when is it considered anti-Semitism? You criticize Israel, and when is it considered, and this is a subjective thing, so I'll just toss it over to you for your guidelines. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, one of the things I've said occasionally in talks is that all of this is really good for anti-Semitism, because people who think Jews control the world, we can't even run a small country. The American Jewish organizations are between a rock and a hard place. They really are. They're being heavily pressured to back the Israeli government, but I don't think they're carrying the bulk of the American Jewish community with them. So, and I had this discussion with a few people on campus 2 weeks ago, and it's like, nobody knows what to do, right? I mean, you don't want to call the Israeli government racist and fascist, even though it kind of is, but you don't want to go public with that. On the other hand, being silent, it seems like an awkward option also, right? So I think it puts us as the American Jewish community in a very, very awkward position. And it has not yet sorted itself out. But one day, Ben-Gvir is going to go up to the Temple Mount, and he's going to create an issue, and there's going to be riots and demonstrations, and he's going to go in swinging his baseball bats. And what are we going to say? Right?
Yeah.
And I have to say also, the image of putting Israeli Arabs on trains and sending them east is just, it's just bad. But he talks about that.
Is there a line that you think the American government would say, at crossing after that point, we cannot continue to, I don't know, it changes our relationship?
I've been kind of watching what Biden's going to do. Biden and Austin, they're sort of at this point, they're kind of consumed with what's going on in Ukraine and whether Germany's going to send Leopard tanks and all that kind of stuff. But so far, nothing really provocative has happened. I mean, Smotrich went up on Temple Mount and walked around with 20 of his closest friends for like 15 minutes, and then that was it.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe next time they're going to have a Pesach service. They're going to, I don't know, sacrifice a lamb. They're going to go inside the mosque. I mean, who knows? And that's when the feces will hit the air circulation system.
Yeah. Okay.
Biden is saying all the right things. Netanyahu is saying all the right things. But you've got Smotrich, you've got Itamar Ben-Gvir, you've just got these people who are not, I don't know how you control them. And Aryeh Deri could create problems, even if he's not in the government. He could tell his followers, look, they threw me out. They're against the the Mizrahim. We need to, take care of ourselves. And you can see a civil war going on there. And some of that's already happening. Not by him, but within the Shas party,
Okay.
I guess this isn't really an upper, is it?
Yeah. Let's open it up and see if you would raise your hand by clicking on the reactions. Or you can, if your camera is open, we could just raise your hand if you have a question or comment. Yeah, Mark.
Hi, my screen was too big. Hi. Peter, I don't know if you could, nice to see you again after a while. I don't know if you can answer this because it's very insider baseball or if you have any thoughts, but I guess in moments like this, my tendency is like I assume that the right wing is going to be horrible and they won and they're going to be horrible. I'm mad at the left for losing the last election, and the center for losing the last election. And I was amazed that the last government, which seemed insane, lasted a year. But it was the broadest ranging coalition in Israeli history, right? From what I understand. And specifically, my question is, for a moment at least, for a year, and well, for numerous elections, Meretz and Labor had run under a joint banner, which gave them more seats.
Right.
Not a whole lot more than Labor's got now, but more seats. And the Arabs, for once, most of them merged and ran together. And that was what made the possibility for a center-left government.
Right.
In this election, they all refused to cooperate with each other, and most of them aren't even in the Knesset anymore. Do they deserve any of the blame? Do you know why they couldn't run together? And yeah.
Well, they certainly bear some of the blame. The problem with the Lapid coalition, I think there were kind of two problems. One, it wasn't all left center. It was left center right, back and forth and up and down. It was a mishmash of parties that had no common, what do I want to say, no common ground, except they didn't like Bibi Netanyahu. So it was a very, very floppy coalition. I was a little bit surprised it lasted as long as it did, but it did. But the other thing was, because it was such a jerry-rigged, I don't know if you want to call it Rube Goldberg kind of coalition, it didn't get a whole lot accomplished. And I think that hurt them. It's like these guys, can't organize a two-car parade. You know what I'm saying? So I think that hurt them as well. And I will say Netanyahu ran a good campaign. And Ben-Gvir, when he's out there and said, look, the Arabs have to understand that enough, right? We don't need any more bus bombings. We don't need any more shootings. We don't need any more, blah, blah, blah. It's enough. We're going to put a stop to it. I think that cashes out the votes. And every time there was a confrontation in and around Jerusalem, he was there with his pistol, So
I heard one good thing, and I'll be quiet then. I listened to this podcast from the Hartman Center
okay.
with Danielle Hartman and Yossi Klein Halevi, and who are center and even right, and one of them's liberal too. But anyway, they just made I thought, an interesting point that weird coalition government of last year supposedly forced a lot of people to say, "Hey, we all exist together here in Israel, and even if we have no common ground, maybe we all have to accept each other's presence in the land, and we have to accept some degree of participation from people who we used to say we're off limits."
Maybe you can't discount the possibility that there is somewhere in there a broad-based coalition But Netanyahu is just a master at putting together coalitions. And it just could be he outmaneuvered everybody else, you know. But if he were to drop dead tomorrow and somebody else take over, there might be a more center left, right, up, down coalition possible. But he's got it all sewed up with his 38 ministries, you know. Nobody wants to drop out because I lose my seat and so forth. Yeah.
Well, on that note, Barb would put in the comments that when she was in Israel recently, there was a significant number of people who thought that Shas would leave the coalition and that would force another election. And her question is, how would this election, how might it be different from the recent ones?
Right. There was talk that if Netanyahu fired Aryeh Deri, that Shas would leave the coalition. It hasn't yet. Stay tuned tomorrow. But this would, if it leaves, I don't think there's anybody who can put together a non-Netanyahu coalition. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they all will get together, but I don't think there's another coalition out there, meaning there's another election, which is this number 6. And all the elections come by, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, so it may not move the Knesset at all. This party might get an extra seat, this party might lose a seat, but it's not going to change the overall dynamics. And that's been true for the last 5 elections. Unless this one just screws up so badly, people say, all right, we really do have to try something new. And maybe cutting the legs off the Supreme Court would be one of those issues that finally people say, okay, enough is enough. But I don't know. What they really need to do is what they're calling not a constitution, but a basic law. They've been passing bits and pieces of the basic law since like the late 90s. And they've got all the easy pieces done, but the really difficult ones, they just cannot get through the Knesset. So there is a constitution, there is a basic law, but it's incomplete, and there are whole sections that just haven't been, passed yet.
Mm-hmm. Looking around, not seeing any hands. Oh, yes. Steve and Nancy.
Yes, I'm a neophyte when it comes to this stuff, but could you describe again how the Supreme Court justices are chosen, what their term limits are, and that's how, and compare it to the United States Supreme Court?
Yeah, the simple answer is no, I can't. So there is I think the term is 5 years. It's not a lifetime. And the justices are nominated by a committee, and the committee is made up of, it's 9 people, 3 from the Supreme Court itself, one of whom is the president of the Supreme Court. I think 2 reps from the Israeli Bar Association, 2 reps from the Knesset, and 2 maybe appointed by the prime minister. Is that 9? And if 7 agree on a candidate, then that candidate becomes a justice. So it's not itself a bad system, but then a lot of people are saying it's sort of self-referential. It's just, it's people in the Supreme Court approving people in the Supreme Court who are approving people in the Supreme Court. And the right wing is especially upset because the Supreme Court can always throw out any law they make by saying, no, it's not reasonable. And you can't appeal that, right? So one of the proposals that's floating around there is if that happens, then you go back to the Knesset and say, all right, if 61 Knesset members vote to override the Supreme Court, then the Supreme Court is overridden. But I mean, you can all figure out. I mean, that puts all the power within the Knesset. And their argument is, well, yeah, well, we're the elected representatives. Supreme Court justices are appointed by themselves, in their own circle. So if any other government made this want to make this change in the Supreme Court, it wouldn't sound as bad. But this government, does that answer the question? And Chayot, who is the Chief Justice or the President, is about to step down. So this is also a crucial period in terms of that. I think her term is about up.
So while we're waiting for anybody else to come up with something, I just was looking at when you put down the parties that are in control. I noticed that except for Likud, they're all religious parties. And I just wondered, is Israel in danger of becoming something of a theocratic state?
Yes. So let me see if I can. Hold on. All the ministers, it's just crazy. So Likud is not religious, but it's right. It's sort of center right. United Torah Judaism is black hat, and Shas is pretty much black hat. The religious Zionists are really black hat. The Otzma Yehudit, Jewish power, is more, it's less religious and more ethnic. We have to beat up the Arabs. So there's certainly, depends how you count the religious Zionist group, but let's say it's 7. So you have 25 seats that are, right-wing, conservative, religious. And they control important ministries, so like of religion and so on and so forth. So they, So I think there is a danger there because Netanyahu cannot alienate any one of those parties because then he's out. And by the way, in the background, it says indictment of what was it, bribery and mishandling of funds and all of that. And part of his being prime minister and controlling the courts is he can maneuver those indictments and that trial away. So he's got a lot of personal investment in keeping his position. So he's not convicted of bribery. That's just another little cog in the wheel.
Okay, Rabbi Steve.
Yeah, thanks. I apologize. My sound may be a little choppy. I think I need to reset my router. But my question has to do with the protests that have been taking place, Peter, and I think mostly in Tel Aviv, but I'm not positive about that. And I'm wondering, in terms of size, how they compare with prior protests at different, turning points in Israeli culture in the past. And I'm also curious to know if you have any sense of who's organizing these protests. Are the parties like Meretz and Labor who didn't cross the threshold? Are they driving these protests? Are they being invited to them? Are they participating in them? Those are my questions.
I don't know. It was huge. The most recent one was estimated at 100,000. And for a country of 10 million, I mean, that's already a significant proportion. Not clear who is organizing them. There's all sorts of allegations floating around Iran, but it's just hard to know. But I think Israelis, secular Tel Aviv Israelis are scared, not to mention how the Arabs feel, not even to mention the Palestinians. I think there's a real fear that this is going to go off the tracks and it's going to be really, really bad. So I don't know how well they're organized or why, but I think people are just really worried. And this government's been in power for like a week, right? So I think we'll have to give them a couple of weeks to get themselves into trouble. But I think in the next few weeks, we'll see what happens, and we'll have a much clearer picture of how far they're willing to go, and whether Netanyahu has any power to stop them. And I'm not so confident that he does.
Thank you.
But stay tuned, and I'm really curious to see what American Jewish organizations, not Zionist Organization of America, but what's HaLev going to say? What can they say and then talk to their students on college campuses? That's going to be a problem. What are College Chabad going to say? What's Federation going to say? Right? What's the Maltz Museum going to say? Right? There's some really tricky issues that are going to come up, and the rhetoric could get really nasty, and my fees will go up. No, but I think this really has some. It could really go off the rails in a bad way, and it could maybe they'll sort it all out, but I'm less than fully optimistic. So, but the Israeli economy is doing really well, so we'll end on that note.
Okay, all right. Last call, anybody have any thoughts or questions?
By the way, I should point out, when Itamar Ben-Gvir did his tour of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, it was called a storming of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the Arab press. I mean, they really pushed it very radically. There was virtually no protest from anybody except Hamas launched a rocket which fell into Gaza Strip. So I think everybody's really intimidated.
I saw the group in Israel that really protested that were the some of the ultra-Orthodox rabbis, because it contradicts Jewish law about going on to that. You're not allowed, I guess, to walk in that area until the next incarnation of the temple. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So Fridays will be.
Hey, Barbara, we got a question?
So maybe it shows my ignorance, but I don't see how the economy is getting better with all this chaos and all this, all these situations.
All right, I'm not making predictions about the economy, but right as of last week, it was doing really well. And Israelis have told me for years that the Israeli economy does well despite the government. Now, if there's enough chaos that gets created, that may all change. I can just tell you as of right now. And if there's a big blow up in the third intifada,
Barb, do you want to read that, or should I read it for you here? Okay. Barb says, a number of Russian oligarchs who are putting money into the economy. Support.
Right.
So they're popping it up.
Yeah, well, and they're also, they're hedging their bets in case they need to leave Russia, or if they've already left Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question. Will or do demonstrations matter to the government?
I think for parts of the government, they do. Whether Smotrich or Ben-Gvir care, I don't know. I think Netanyahu cares. There are other people who are, Benny Gantz would care. I mean, there are people there who are serious government ministers, you know, who would care about this. But I'm not sure they all would. And the proof will be in the pudding in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. And Bill Shermarka says, I have a picture from the demonstrations and there are about 30 to 40 sponsoring organizations.
Ah. Yeah.
Which is a good thing.
And there was talk of a law to disallow NGOs from outside of Israel to give money to Israeli organizations. So that may be addressing that.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
Well, sorry, I bugged everybody out, but it's a complicated situation.
Well, we need to know. That's the important thing. Peter, thank you. This was enlightening and really brought out why, the underlying reasons why it's the way it is. And that's good to know. I want to just make a little plug for next week. It may sound like it'll be the same, but our speaker next week, who's Ori Neer, who's the Vice President of Public Affairs for Americans for Peace Now, the part I've talked to him about is he has a different focus. And so he will be focusing a good part of his talk on how all of this will affect Palestinians, particularly in the West Bank. And he's part of the organization Americans for Peace Now, which is a lobbying group on Capitol Hill. And so he will be talking about some of the ins and outs of what goes on and the influence that takes place within in the government from various organizations, and how maybe the protests which Americans for Peace Now are organized or part of the organization in Washington and perhaps in New York, how those things might affect the American political reaction. Okay, we got one last question here from Dorinda. Any attempts from outside organizations or groups to pull the strings on things? I don't know if you're meaning, you know, like Russian influence or Iranian influence or what, but that would be a interesting question.
Yeah, you know, this is government's only a week or so old. I think we need to give it a few weeks, and things will become much clearer as what's going on. We're just at the beginning of this process, and I think it's going to be really complicated.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Okay, well, I think we can conclude a little early. So thank you all for coming. And again, Peter, thank you for that talk. It was really helpful for us to.
Well, thank you for having me. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
See everybody next week.
Okay. Thanks, Alan, for organizing this.
Okay.
Okay.
Night, everybody.
Night.